Y'all planning for this?
Welcome back, TPR Nation. This is Jamie Shilanski in an episode of Worlds to Conquer, and I have been getting a ton of questions from financial advisors and their team saying, Jamie, we've listened to your guys' podcast episode. We've really had it out. A lot of times this is a manager in a practice that's been discussing this with a financial advisor or a financial advisor that is maybe have 2 or 3 employees. And it comes to me and says, Jamie, we've been having it out. We've been discussing whether or not our current team in place is the right team. And we've got a couple of team members. Normally it's one or 2 team members that really have to go, and we're not sure how to transition it. So today in this episode, we are going to talk about the do's and don'ts of firing employees, and also what to do when an employee just resigns. Maybe it's not a firing. Maybe it's just a resignation because the job has ran its course. So I have a lot of experience in this area, running hundreds of employees. And no matter what, whenever we lose somebody that's been on our team for the last couple of years, it's always impactful. It's impactful for me. It's impactful for that person, of course, that's moving on. And then for the rest of the team as well. So as I go through this conversation with you today, I'm going to talk to you about my do's and don'ts personally of what I allow myself. And then also, how do I handle it with the rest of my team? So in the multiple businesses that I play a role in, team development and culture is 100% in my wheelhouse and responsibility. And as I go through that, when I have somebody leave my organization, what I don't want is a rippling effect. And I don't want other team members to feel really unsettled because remember, during this whole entire time, we've talked a lot about team building, about relationships, about working together, and how we create the culture where we're really going in. I know it used to be really cliche in the 80s to say our work family, but genuinely, people that we are going to battle with, people that we are in the trenches with, we are working day in and day out, side by side. You're going to form relationships. You're going to have bonds. Some people you're going to allow into your fold. Some people you're going to keep at arm's distance, but still, they are part of your normal routine. In fact, most people in America see that their colleagues a lot more than they actually see their family members. So as I work with different employers across multiple sectors of industry, it's really fascinating to me to look at the different statistics regarding employment tenure. And sometimes it's an industry sector. For example, hairstylists and estheticians. Normally, clients are having to follow a hairstylist or an esthetician, not because they left that profession, but because they left wherever their current job is. And so that person will be at a place for 1 or 2 years, and then we have to go hunt them down, find them, figure out what the different salon was. And as we develop that in a consumer mindset, we have no allegiance to a certain salon. Our allegiance is to that professional. Especially for women, when it comes to our hairdressers, we love to stay with the same hairdresser. When we have found the best hairdresser, we will actually wait to get a haircut until we're in that person's vicinity just to make sure that they are the ones cutting our hair. Meaning if we move to a different town, we will drive to the old town to get our hair done. If we move to a different state and we go back home, we will get a haircut while we are back home. Because that's how loyal we are to that professional, being able to understand how we like things. And when it comes to different sectors, there's a lot of fast turnover in certain occupations, but in finance and accounting, there's really not a lot of heavy, high turnover. It used to be jobs that you would be at 20, 30, 40 years. In fact, the joke in finance is that most financial advisors never retire. They just die at their desks. Why? Because the work is hard, but not that hard, and the money is really good. And so instead of retiring and making room for a future generation to come up, the financial advisors just stay in the business. Now, I will give pushback to that statement. I also think that the financial advisor has a lot of purpose when they are giving that type of advice. And that's one of the reasons that they delay retirement is they still feel a lot of value and they feel that they are service to their clients. And they've also formed relationships for 20 or 30 years that they're not just likely to give up in a heartbeat. But as we look across these different sectors, it also goes by generation and gender. Those are things that also play a dramatic impact in how long people are staying in their employment tenure. So generally, women hold jobs, and this is very interesting, for fewer years than men. Now, why? Well, because most of the time, women are still the caregivers in the household. I've shared with you that Shilanski & Associates RRA up in Anchorage, Alaska, was started by our mom and dad. Mike is my baby brother, but our mom and dad, Floyd and Rosa, started the practice back in 1981. And And at the time, my dad had just gotten out of the military and my mom had been a military wife. And every time that they moved bases, and this is before bases were 3 years, they were moving around 1.8 years. So every 1.8 years, they would have to shuffle to a different base. And when that happened, my mom had a hell of a time finding a job. It was really difficult for her to gain employment because people knew she wasn't going to be there for very long. So when we started our own business, one of the things that was really near and dear to her was hiring military spouses, because she recognized how much she had to give and how desperately she wanted and had to work at that time, but how difficult it was for anyone to give her a chance. So when we started our own business, Shilanski and Associates, it was one of the things we actively sought and still do to this day is hiring military personnel. Now, the beautiful part about today is that because of the internet and the hybrid working arrangements, which we have been doing since the early 2000s, we were really able to keep really great personnel when their spouse PCS. So when they moved to a different base, we didn't have to fire or terminate that relationship if we wanted to continue to work with somebody. And that's been a great blessing in our lives. But most women in those situations, they oftentimes have to leave the workforce because they've got kids. And COVID freaking exasperated this effort significantly. I had a ton of financial planning clients sit down with us in 2020 when schools were on, off, on, off. I mean, it was like a middle, junior high romance, how much schools were on and off. And so kids were constantly going to school, then they were learning from home, then they were doing all this remote stuff, then they were out of school. And it was just this yo-yo effect. And so when you had two people in a working household, something had to give. Something had to give. And a lot of times we had grandparents step in intermittently during 2020 to help out and get the kids to school or watch them when they were out of school. But then 21, 22, grandma and grandpa remembered that they had raised their babies. And this was no more helping out in a pinch. This was becoming the standard, and they wanted to go play with their friends. Nobody plays harder or faster or longer than baby boomers. My God, that generation is nonstop. I like to go to bed at 9 o'clock. My folks are habitually partying with their friends until 2 a.m. And I do mean partying. Music loud, drinks pouring, dancing, having a great time. Boomers doing what boomers do best. And this left a lot of other parents in kind of this free-for-all of saying, great, now what do we do with the kids? Because my mom and dad were helping, my grandma and grandpa were helping, but now it's becoming a little bit more habitual. So we work with a lot of financial planning clients, and I bet you shared the same experience where one of them had to take a different job in which they could work remotely. They had to reduce their hours to part-time, or they had to leave the workforce entirely. Now, as of 2023, we started to see a lot more women return to the workforce, which is fantastic. But generally, when it comes to raising of the kids in the household, women are the ones that stay out of the workforce in order to do that. Additionally, your generation plays a significant role in how you approach employment tenure. And if we think about it, gone are the days where we would sit at a job for 40 years to collect a watch and a pension. And because we no longer have pensions, there's not that dangling carrot out there to stay in a particular place of employment for a significant amount of time. Instead, it's about internal and personal growth and what we're able to achieve. So as we look at the workforce today, men have a slightly higher tenure than women. So men stay in employment about 4.3 years compared to women who stay at about 3.8 years. And this is also based on your age group. So if you're between the ages of 20 and 24, your median tenure is 1.3 years. That's how long you're staying at a job. Now that makes sense. Normally you're in college or you're just doing a starting out job and you're trying to level up and get into something more career oriented. But comparatively, if you're 25 to 34 years old, your normal tenure is 3 to 4 years. Now let's jump ahead to a little bit of older age group that is 45 to 54. And they stay in a job about 7.2 years. That's their tenure in their job. Anything beyond that, that is somebody that's really made a career out of staying with their current employer. And as my son Lane and I were just chatting the other day, he's 22 years old and he is a compliance officer at a bank. Terrified playing, but he's actually really great at it. He does exceptional work. They're really impressed with him. He's definitely a rule follower, so he excels at this job. I don't know where he got that. It's not my gene necessarily. But in this rule follower capacity, he was talking to me the other day and we were kind of goal setting and he was kind of planning and he said, hey, listen, I'm really happy with the bank. I don't see myself staying there, forever, but I do see me staying there right now, et cetera. And he goes, and I've already got a 3-year tenure. And I was like, 3 years? 3 years is tenure? And I was like, maybe we should just use it. Like, let's just make the 10 out of that 10 years sound more, prominent. I said, 3 years? 3 years is super short, Lane. That's not a lot of time. That's where you barely, kind of figured your job out in those 3 years. But in his mind, he was already well onto the way to establishing a career. And yes, that might be seen significant because he's 22. But recently, just this last week, I was dealing with an employee who I've worked with for several years. I've been associated with her in different capacities, but she's worked for us for the last 3 years. And she said the same thing. She said, during my 3-year tenure with the company, which has been long proven to show my track results. And I was like, wow, this individual sees 3 years as a significant amount of time. And that is incredible to me. But in her mind, that was a long time in a job. 3 years was a long time for her, which really highlights the perspective between the employer and the employee. So if you're a team member listening to this, you're like, wow, 3 years, that's really great. She's really serious about it. She's put in her time, etc. And as an employer, I'm like, 3 years, you just figured out your job 3 days ago. Not that she did lousy in her work. That's not what I'm trying to imply. But most of the employees, like when I bring on a new person, I always tell them, I said, hey, that first 6 months, you're not going to know your head from your feet. You're going to feel super overwhelmed. Things won't make sense. They're not going to click. But about month 7, you're going to start grabbing those edges of the puzzle piece and you're going to start putting them together for a bigger picture. But really, it's going to take you a few years before you absolutely hit your stride. I feel employees really hit their stride about year 5. Year 5, they've gone through enough experiences. They've been through audits. They've been through onboarding and also letting clients go. They've interacted with team members. They are beginning to develop an expertise in their particular subject matter. But what happens when an employee is not hitting their benchmarks? What happens when we do have to let somebody go or that person resigns? This normally happens for whatever reason. It can be kind of cyclical. It happens around the first of the year. People start looking for different jobs, different opportunities, or you as a business owner have just gone through your business planning in October, November. You've set your goals. Now you're announcing them to the team. And now you're coming with the harsh reality that not all the team members on your organization are the ones that are going to make it to the top of the mountain. This was really hard for me to understand. I had a team member that I was investing a lot of time and energy into. They were good. They weren't great. And I was really advocating for them, because they came in completely ignorant, but they weren't stupid. And so I was educating them on that. I was showing them the different ways. They came from challenging circumstances when they were little. We were overcoming that. They were being the change in the generations that they had wanted to see when they started. It was really great. It was speaking to all of my truths that I love to walk in, but they just don't have it. Whatever it is that makes somebody exceptional in their job, in their career, in their area of expertise, what makes them likable and able to understand intense subjects and simplify those subjects and deliver lots of value and to show up for people over and over again. They just were missing that ingredient. And I don't know exactly if that is something that can be taught. I think it's something that has to come within. I mean, we do it all the time. We realize that people that might be really proficient in their job, they might be really good. They might be really technically accurate, but they just don't have that thing. They don't have that ability to relate to them or the ability to communicate, or they don't see the big picture, or there's just something that's just slightly off. And so that's when we start to enter this period where it's a lot of square pegs and round holes, unfortunately, because we keep trying to shave off the edges and we keep trying to make them fit because they want it, we want it, and ultimately we're not coming to that realization. So now we got to go through one of two paths. Either that person realizes it and they're going to resign, or somebody's going to get fired. So I'm going to walk you through my do's and don'ts. So one of the things that I make sure that I do with my team members is that everybody knows across organizations from day one what gets you fired. And I say this over and over to them so that they know what the truths are. Because a lot of times if I ask for a one-on-one meeting, I have heard, though I don't entirely agree with, that I could be a formidable force when I come into the office. And if I ask to meet with you one-on-one, that can be an intimidating circumstance. So I like to kick off meetings with making sure people know when they're in trouble, when they're not in trouble. And I say, hey, I just want to review my rules around what gets somebody fired. There are 3 things that get you fired. 1, you do something illegal. Can we both agree on that? Everyone's like, yeah, duh. Totally. All right, great. 2, you do something unethical. Unethical also means to me that you're not living in integrity and you're not being accountable. So if you lack accountability, that counts as well. The 3rd thing that gets you fired is if you create drama for me. I don't like it. I was not that girl in junior high. I wasn't that girl in high school. I wasn't that girl in college. I don't like drama and I won't tolerate it. So my policy with all employees is I have a no drama policy. So if we have an environment where there's absolutely no drama and I hire you and you onboard and drama begins, I'm going to T-Swift you right out of here. The problem was you must go. And that's just a shared common belief between all of us. So what is drama? Drama is when you are unaccountable. It is when you start picking on somebody, when you single them out, when your tone, when your behavior, when your approach with that individual is rude. If you are lacking the common decency, you wouldn't give a store clerk with a coworker. I already mentioned that a lot of us spend more time with our coworkers than we do with our own families. So to have somebody creating drama, that's a game changer for me. That is a deal breaker. You have got to go. I'm playing a different game. See you later. Bye. So every time I've terminated an individual, it is because they have violated one of these 3 rules. They've either done something illegal, which thank God does not happen often and is several decades in between. That's great because we deal with people's life savings and you don't want somebody like that on your team. 2, the unethical and moral. This is the one that normally gets people. When people fail to be accountable, that is the number 1 reason I will let you go and is the most frequent one. When you say it's everyone else's fault, but don't see your shared hand and how we got here or what you could have done better. In fact, all the leaders that I work with, when it hits the fan, because it will from time to time, it's going to hit the fan. We'll say, okay, great. Here was my part in this. Here's what I did. Here's what I failed to do. And the failing to do is just as important as to what you have done, because a lot of times as leaders, it isn't what we did that resulted in a negative consequence. It was what we failed to do. We failed to intervene. We failed to step up. We failed to give clear instructions. Whatever that failure was, we have to own it and say, hey, this was my part in this scenario. So it's not always the employee's part, but a lot of times what we'll do is we'll say, hey, and here's a great example. We had this happen with one of our team members. She's no longer with us, and it was a good goodbye between us. But we did 8821s in our office. Those are tax transcripts. So it's a wonderful hack that you can do as a financial advisor. We partner with Retirement Tax Services, so they help us get this in place now. Stephen Jarvis runs that as the head CPA over there. He does a phenomenal job. But we partner with them to do 8821s to get tax transcripts for all of our clients. Now, what we did was during that spring surge, when all clients were ready to fill out tax information and they were already in the thralls of hunting and gathering their financials, we said, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, Bob and Sue, we would love you to fill out this form. What this does is this puts us as a carbon copy to grab any correspondence that the IRS may send to you. The reason that we want this form on file is because let's say that you're on that wonderful cruise that you were sharing all the pictures with, and the IRS sent you a nastygram, and that nastygram has 10 days to respond to, and you are gone. You're not even here. Our office would love to receive a copy of that so we can check out its legitimacy and maybe get ahead of notifying you about that before waiting around for the post. So 95% of our clients, it was a really high statistic, filled out the form. They were like, gosh, that would be great. I would love for you guys to have the heads up, so because I'm going to call you second anyway, as soon as I get that letter from the IRS to figure out what we need to do. So we had all of our clients sign this, and we had one team member go through and she was tooted her own horn quite a bit on this one and said, I'm the only one that worked on these. I'm the only one that got all these documents signed. I got all them signed when clients came in for the appointments. I filed them. I got them all in with the IRS. It was fantastic. And I did this by myself. She wanted a lot of accolades for doing that project. Well, what happened was, as she was filling out these forms, she was saying Bob and Sue and filling out the information on the form according to the CRM record. How does the IRS address Bob and Sue? Do they call Bob and Sue Bob and Sue? No, it is Robert and Suzanne. And whatever address is on that 8821 better be the address that was on the last filed tax return with the IRS. Because if you are one character or letter off, it is rejected. So we had a 95% success rate of clients filling out this form and turning it in to us. And we had an over 60% rejection from the IRS because all the forms we had filled out and signed were incorrect. They were missing something. They were either the wrong address because the client had moved. It was formatted the incorrect way because we've all looked at our tax return and the address always looks a little bit jacked up and none of us go to the IRS and correct it. Or we had middle initials on our tax return, but we didn't have it on the 8821. Or we abbreviated a client's name on the 8821 because that's what they commonly go by, and it is not what was on the tax return. So as we sat down and went through it with this individual, we talked a lot about the accountability of this. And I said, hey, listen, you gave yourself a lot of credit when you were the only ones filling out these forms. But that also means now that they're all wrong almost, guess whose responsibility it is? It's yours. Now, you have to go back to the client and you have to be accountable for it and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize on your tax return that you don't put Bob down. You put Robert down. Now, is that a big deal for the client? No. Is it inconvenient? Oh, heck yeah. Did we just double our work capacity and also lose some of our social credibility with clients because we didn't fill a form out correctly? Yes. Everything we do counts. Now, the good news is we have enough deposits in the social credibility bank that a subtraction, a debit of this nature does not necessarily hurt our reputation, but it sure as hell doesn't help it. And so we had to go back with that team member and really hold them accountable. And it was super, super uncomfortable. And it wasn't this egregious disciplinary action. She didn't do anything illegal. She was a little bit unaccountable. So we had to go through that, but then rose to the occasion of being accountable. So she had the opportunity to realize that she was blame shifting and recognize what part she had in that. Now, the third part of this also is that we also had an opportunity as leaders to say, hold on, we did not spell this out correctly. We did not give clear enough instructions. And we also didn't put any plan in place to quality control check their work. We were in our spring surge, which is our busiest surge out of the year, March to April. And we were collecting signatures on the form. A lot of times those forms were signed before the appointment began because they take care of that in the lobby while the client was waiting, or immediately after when the client had adjourned. And because it doesn't need an advisor signature on it, we weren't necessarily checking every single form that went to see if there's a discrepancy. And also, don't kid yourself, you wouldn't have caught it either. Unless you're a CPA or super, super high analytical person, you would not have caught this. Do not kid yourself. If it said Bob Jones, you would have said, great, Bob Jones. You wouldn't have said, oh, hold on, I think their tax return says Robert Jones. Now you will, but you wouldn't have at the time. All right, so those are the three things in our office that get you fired. So once I've set that ground with our team members, there's about darn near nothing we can't work through together if you have somebody with the right attitude and the willingness to do this. But if I do have to let somebody go, here's some of my do's and don'ts. So let's just say that I have to fire someone for an egregious mistake. I'm immediate with that axe. I want them wrapped up, I want it done, and I want them out of the office. I let the person know that I'm going to terminate them, and then all of their access is shut off instantaneously. It is revoked on every single technology platform. If you do not have somebody in place that is monitoring that for you, one of my recommendations is an action item that you can take is to create a master checklist. That master checklist should list everything that that employee has access to so that you can go through. If you turned it on, you can turn it off. So if you've turned on access for somebody, you need to also be able to turn it off. If you're using Google or Microsoft Office or some kind of shared workspace like that, if you are going to terminate somebody, do not shut their access off until after you've had that termination meeting. Otherwise, they're going to log in to attend a meeting that they can't get into because you've already shut their access off. So learn from our mistake on that one. Make sure that you have the meeting and then begin to terminate them. And that's if somebody does something completely egregious. And that's what's going to get you fired. But let's just say somebody resigns. Somebody says, hey, it's been real. It's been fun. It wasn't always real fun. I'm going to go ahead and move on. There's two ways in which that happens. And I just went through both with different companies. And one of them says, listen, I am so profoundly grateful for everything that you guys have taught me. This is just no longer, they had a lot of personal trauma going on, a lot of indecision in their own lives. And they said, this is no longer where my passion is. And I'm not bringing my best. And I'm so unhappy. And it's beginning to affect my work. And we agreed. We 100% agreed. And we loved and cared cared about that person and respected them enough that I needed to end up saying to them, not all endings are bad endings. Not all goodbyes have to be bad goodbyes. Like, people get to part ways as friends. You get to be able to hold yourself to a different standard and decide how this gets to end. And so one of the things I said, they said, okay, maybe I'll do 2 weeks notice. And I said, no, 2 weeks notice is F you. 2 weeks notice is an F you to your employer. 30 days notice shows that I do value and respect you, and I'm looking to transition and move out of this role. So I had a great conversation with this one employee, and it's always super interesting to me because I'm going to take you through 2 situations that I just endured. One of them where employee was ready to resign, and it was a heartbreaking decision for them. And then the other one where the employee should have been fired 2 months ago, but we tried to coach and educate them out and try to give them the powers and the tool sets to be able to overcome some of the challenges that they were having. But then they resigned and they gave a 2 weeks notice. So let's talk about the difference between these 2 people. So the one that was heartbreaking, I said, hey, you do get a choice how you leave. And you can leave in a way that is very professional. You can leave in a way that doesn't taint the last 6.5 years that you just put into this business. Or you can keep with the 2 weeks you just mentioned and then wrap it up and be done. They said, no, I really value my coworkers. I value the organization. I value the work we're doing. I don't want to leave on a bad foot. And I said, then you have to be in control of that. You are the one that's in control of your reputation on how you leave. So let me walk you through how I've seen people leave positively and how they've leave negatively. And we went through some of those aspects because when I was growing up, my mom used to call it short timers, that people got short timers. They gave their notice. They would, give 2 weeks or 30 days, whatever it was. It could even have been 3 months. But remember when you were a senior in high school? When you're a senior in high school and thinking about those last 3 months of high school, I don't remember a gosh darn thing I learned. Not one thing did I learn. But I remember the parties. I remember the friends. I remember skipping out of class and going to do stuff. I remember all of those different things. I don't remember anything that I learned educationally. And that's because we had short timers. We knew that we were going to be ending this relationship here pretty soon. In employment, it can get a lot like that too. And so people can start to care less about the work they're doing. They don't always give 110% at that point. Hell, they barely give 50%. They're showing up just to make sure that they don't get a bad reference or out of some sense of obligation, but they're not really putting their interest in there. And then they also can spread a lot of discontentment. And so they can spread a lot of negativity with other employees. And so I wanted to make sure I went through, hey, these are positive, ways that you can interact. These are negative. And what we did in that particular instance was we said, you know what, let's use this next 30 days to be super intentional about your time. And here's what I want it to look like. And so for the first 3 weeks out of that 30 days that I asked her for, we set up training. I said, you have 6 years of expertise in a particular field. I'd love for you to spend the next 3 weeks working hand in hand with another person to try to give them a lot of that. Now at Shilanski & Associates, our RIA up in Anchorage, Alaska, we're really intentional about documenting everything and making sure we have training manuals and protocols. But still, even with as intentional as we are, there's things that we do as human beings that are just instinctive to us, and we don't document, we don't write down, and no one else can guess why we made the choice we made. For example, think about when you're booking your airline tickets. On that plane where you want to sit. Do you like to sit in first class? Do you like premium? Do you like coach? Do you like whichever seat's cheaper? Do you want to be in the middle? Or would you rather have an aisle or a window? Do you like to be in the front of the plane? Do you like to be in the back of the plane? You have preferences that if you ask somebody, hey, could you book me a ticket from Seattle to Boston? And that person goes and books the ticket and you get it in your hands, you're going to be dissatisfied because there were preferential things that you would have just done instinctively that another person didn't know. And that's a lot like our jobs. There's things that we just do because we know to do them that we haven't documented and written down. So this is a wonderful opportunity for them to work hand in hand with another person and pass along that experience, pass along that expertise in a very intentional way. Now, on that 4th week, what I did was I said, let's just wind it down to part-time. And so let's bring you in Monday through Friday, but from 8 to 4. And we'll just kind of segue, you to kind of just inch your way out there so the rest of the team is ready. And she did it beautifully. I was so proud of her. I was so proud that I called her the day after she no longer worked with us. And I said, I'm really happy with the way you left. And she said, of course, I wouldn't have left otherwise. And I said, no. I have seen really classy, intentional, dedicated professionals believe in a storm of chaos that just only made the people more upset that they didn't just fire them on the spot. You did have a choice in this. And I'm so glad that you took that last bit of instruction that we gave you and you really ran with it. And we set up the rules of engagement. We set up the boundaries. And then I was really hyper intentional about being observant, because if they had, unfortunately, if she had developed any type of short timers, if she began to taint something, if she began to get negative with the other employees, boom, they got to go. They got to go instantaneously. It's not worth a handoff of knowledge to rock the rest of my team. But she didn't. She did a beautiful job. Now, conversely, I have another employee that, honest to God, my dad always says this to me, is that when your first thoughts become your second, they really should be your first. And that's when you're like, gosh, I should fire this employee. They're really not doing a good job. Oh my. And here's one thing we do terrible in this country. We promote people to the point in which they can no longer do their job. Let me say that again, because it's important. We promote people to the point that they can no longer do their job. So if you ever had somebody that was really great at a role, freaking rock star at a role. And so when the opportunity for some type of advancement came up, you shove them into that advancing role. And guess what? They fail because they're not good at it. And so we advance that person until we find what they're not good at anymore. And that's a horrible quality that we do in this country for the sake of watching people grow. And sometimes people are just really good at what they do and their compensation should increase, but maybe not their position. We don't want to find a position you're no longer good at and then stick you in it for whatever reason. And so this employee should have been terminated because they were violating the drama rule. Their skill set was mediocre. There was nothing to write home about, but they were doing their job. They weren't doing it any worse or better than anyone else. But they violated the drama rule in the sense that they constantly told me how great their work was and how poor other people's work was. And they began to single out people. And, at one point I was like, am I in a lunchroom? What is happening here? So we were like, all right, you know what? We're going to coach this person. We're going to discipline them. We're going to give them the tool set. We're going to advise them. We're going to give them the chance to grow. Because a lot of us make mistakes. If I look back in my 20s and 30s of the mistakes I made, if somebody would have sat down and gosh, that happened to my brother and I one time. We got our butts reamed by someone, reamed by them. And we had come into the office and we decided to, I am very notorious for this, by the way. In fact, my parents used to joke that every time in Alaska where we live, we all take off for Hawaii in January. And so they would stay longer than I would in Hawaii. And I'd come back and I would just mass spring clean either houses, condos, I'd get rid of things, freshen them up, redesign, all this kind of thing. And so we were in the office and I decided that I was going to move offices around for better efficiency. And so I went through, got a bunch of friends. We did this. We did it low budget and it was really great in my mind. And I was like, wow, everyone's going to be so happy. And what I did was I moved one of the offices of a part-time employee who was older. She was in her 60s and she was an accountant, and we had moved her to a different space because she was at this point only coming in one time a week. And so I was like, oh, well, then she doesn't need this full office. We can give it to this other person that's going to meet with clients, blah, blah, blah. We gave her no heads up. We gave her no courtesy. We just did it. We moved all of our stuff and we did it for our better efficiency and downgraded her into a cubicle. So when she walked in on her day of employment and saw that all of her office had changed and we had moved her over to a cubicle with no notice, she lit us up. And she went to my parents and then had a sit down meeting with us. And guess what? My parents, they let us have it. They sat very quiet. And to have my father be quiet, that's hard. But they sat very quiet and they let my brother and I get reamed into by this woman. And it was a great learning lesson. We should have been in trouble. We should have been reamed into because we didn't give her common respect. We didn't give her common decency. And we didn't take the role she was doing serious because she was only there one time a week. And there were reasons that she needed her own office. There were reasons that she needed things closed off and that we did not have any, recognition of in our early 20s. We were kids, right? Like 22, 23 at this time. So it was great learning lesson for us to have to take our lumps in that situation and have to deal with a really angry employee. and to learn our place, and that it wasn't our place to do this to this individual. And while our relationship after that was never stellar, she did give us the opportunity to grow from it. She gave us the opportunity to say, I'm sorry. She gave us the opportunity to put things right. And she gave us the opportunity to earn her respect back over time. And so when I look at individuals, if they're making a mistake that they just didn't know it was a mistake, and there's a chance to educate them and allow them to take responsibility for it, hell yeah, let's do it. So this particular individual, that's exactly what we were trying to do. We had 2 counseling sessions and said, here's the areas you're responsible, here's the areas that you're deficient in, and this is what you have to do, and here's what you have to show us over the next amount of months in order to be able to be promoted and have a compensation review. And they said, okay, great. Thank you so much. We're going to take this into consideration, and go. Now, what did they do? They spent the next month looking for a different job. That's what they did. So they didn't take the advice that we had given them that there were areas to grow. Instead, they were like, everyone else is the problem. I'm not the problem. And so they submitted their termination notice, and the notice was just this litany of how everyone else is incompetent next to this individual. I mean, literally just went on and on and on about how great they were and how terrible everyone else was. And people that she worked with, people she considered friends, people that were in that fold with them. So she submitted her 2 weeks. We said, thanks, don't really need 2 weeks. See you later, bye. Because this should have happened months ago. Now, when that happens, you get a choice as an employer. There's several logistic things that have to happen. You got to get them out their last pay. One of the things is, as part of our compensation package, you know that we allow for technology allowances as well as professional development allowances. Part of my agreement with employees is that if your employment terminates within 6 months of receiving any of those, then I get that back. I'm getting that bonus income back, if you will. So let's just say that they had used $3,500 of their continuing education bonus within that 6-month time frame. Then I would pro rata it out. So it was 5 months, we'd kind of scale it back down. If they had just received it and it hadn't even been 1 month, I take all $3,500 back via wage garnishment. And that's the importance of having your employer contracts in place that outlines all of these details. I particularly do this a lot in the medical field with compensation agreements for providers, for practitioners, that says, hey, here's your sign-on bonus of X, but it is on a pro rata basis, and I will go garnish your last pay in order to pay this back. So making sure that you have that in place so that you can garnish your check is great. And then also I do pay out paid time off. So I know a lot of employers get really upset about this and they're like, no, they quit or they're fired or they don't get any of it, blah, blah, blah. And if you're terminated for cause, then there is reason that you can lose that. But for the most part, here's how I feel. If you didn't want to offer them the benefit, you shouldn't have offered it to them. And if it was paid time off that they've been earning, they earned it. So go ahead, cash them out. I have a 80-hour carryover for the first part of the year. So if they didn't use all of it the prior year, they get to carry over X amount of time. But it doesn't just keep accruing, it's use or lose, except for that one carryover provision. And so I will cash their PTO out. I also make sure that they know that within 24 hours, I have to have all of our electronics returned to us. When I'm in receipt of all the electronics, that is when I send out the check for their PTO. Just in case anyone, especially because we have a hybrid working arrangement with all of our employees, anyone wants to keep all of their stuff. And sometimes this works out. Like in the case of the one employee, they had a bunch of PTO that was going to be cashed out. They really wanted to keep an iPad and Remarkable, said, hey, can we just wash this out? Sure, I have no problem with that. But for the most part, if it's especially the computers and things like that, it is tied to getting it back. So once we have that back, we return it to them. All right, then we finish those logistics with that individual. I document everything that comes in right inside their personnel file. So it's their letter of resignation or termination. And then it's also my review notes with them. We go over an exit interview. So anything about confidential information, any disparaging. I don't always have to do this unless the person has a non-compete provision in place. If they have a non-compete or restrictive covenant in place that says, hey, you can't do X for X amount of time or years, which are enforceable, then what I will do is I will have an exit interview just to remind them, because I don't want to be in a lawsuit any more than they do. And so I'll say, hey, listen, just a reminder, here's the provisions, here's what we agreed to, make sure you don't violate them. Now, one of the things I do in the financial services sector, as well as the medical sector, is I allow people to buy themselves out of their non-compete. So if you don't want to listen to that non-compete, great, cool. Here's the price tag that goes with it, and you can go ahead and buy yourself out of it. The two reasons I like to have this in place are, one, it gives people the chance to leave if they want to, and the terms in which they are able to, that you're agreeing on while you're both friends. The second reason is, if we do go to court, then I'm going to go before a judge and I'm literally going to say, hey, listen, if they want out, here's the price tag we both mutually agreed on. And I've got a lot of success having restrictive covenants upheld, because there is that calculation inside of there that said, hey, you are allowed out of this. You just have to pay X, which you've already agreed on. So it's twofold for both me and the employee. My accountant always knows first, so that we're satisfying all of these requirements. And then I want to have a team meeting. So whether someone is resigning or they're going to be terminated, I have a team meeting. I also make one-on-one phone calls to stakeholders. So stakeholders in your organizations are the people that should know before everyone else knows, for whatever reason. So this could be their lead. This could be another advisor. This could be a manager. This could be an integrator, a CEO. This could be somebody that you want to make sure helps you answer questions that are going to be forthcoming in the weeks. And so what kind of questions are normally coming? So when an employee leaves, it's really good to make sure we set the tone. If it's a good goodbye, make it a good goodbye. Celebrate it. Have fun with it. Thank that person for their time. This isn't indentured servitude. People don't have to stay forever. If it's a bad one, make sure that the rest of the team member knows that they're going to be okay. So when I talk to team members, and first of all, they're curious, what happened? Why are they leaving? What's going on? But then the real motive that the team member wants to know is, what is the plan? How is that person's workload going to be dispersed? How are we going to make sure clients are taken care of? Who's picking up where that person left off at? And how does this impact me as an individual? So before I call any of my team members or stakeholders, I will make sure that we've got a plan, and I've discussed it with the ownership team, exactly what we're going to tell team members, exactly what is and isn't people's business, because I do not go around and tell people why somebody's resigning or why they were let go. People can draw their own conclusions, and oftentimes they're shocked but not surprised, and they already know that something has been brewing in the water. And so I'll let them know on that front, say, hey, listen, the so-and-so decided to go the other way. We're so happy. We're going to have them a great send-off. We really wish the best for them, etc. Or, if it's the other way around, we say, hey, so-and-so is resigning, and we think that's a great idea. We're going to encourage them to find work elsewhere. And then people can draw their own conclusions as to why or what was going on. But I don't go into the nit and gritty with any employees, because it's none of their business. And I don't want to foster a drama environment. But I do want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And then I want to tell them, great, here's how we're going to be transferring those person's tasks. Here's how we're going to transfer their email. Here's how we're going to transfer their workload. Here's what we have in store in the weeks to come. And then the next question that they're going to ask is whether or not we're going to fill that person's role. And that's really up to you in your organizational chart. A lot of times when people leave, the good send-off that we had, we just made up a job because we really liked this person. We didn't need them in that role. They weren't necessary, but we just really liked them, and they had been with the company so long. We wanted to keep them going. And so we were giving them work that was not mission critical, but still work that had to be done. If the situation was otherwise and they had mission critical work, we would have already outlined a plan of who was going to tackle what in that person's absence. And that way our team knows that we are at the helm. And then I also like to set up, really good expectations of what the expected turnover for that position is. And this helps people really put it into context. So a lot of times I'll have individuals that have reached a manager or project manager level or an operations level or something a little bit higher. And I'll say, hey, listen, the tenure for most people in your position is 7 to 12 years. But the tenure for somebody in this position doing admin or data work, that's a 1 to 3 year job. If you think about other environments, have you ever seen this happen? And they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So then we learn that certain turnover for certain employees isn't a bad thing. It's just a thing. Now, here's what I don't do. I don't volley back and forth with the employee that's leaving about what they did or didn't do. So in the example I gave you that employee that said the litany of how great their work was and how terrible everyone else was. Better believe I have documents pages of work that we've had to correct on this employee's behalf, or things that they have done wrong, or tasks that they have outstanding, or complaints that they have received from people. But I'm not going to sit there and go, well, you know what, before you leave, let me point out all of these ways that you really just weren't very good at what you were doing, because there's no value in that. I know I'm in the right. I don't have to sit here and volley back and forth and get in an argument with somebody to pop their bubble or to come out ahead. I'm already ahead. That person who did mediocre here is going to go on to do mediocre elsewhere because they have no sense of self-awareness about the job that they are doing. Now, this has nothing to do with whether or not I'm confrontational and unwilling to call somebody out, because I will bring your feet to the mat. I mean, I will hold them to the fire. We will go through it when it needs to be done and when it's constructive and we both have something to gain from it. What I won't do is get in a for tat for somebody that I have nothing to gain from them by doing this. They're not going to learn. They're not going to grow. They're not going to accept responsibility. They're not going to be less dramatic on their way out. And it really goes back to something I told my son and niece growing up. It takes the same amount of energy to be happy or sad. You just have to make your decision. You can choose to be positive or you can choose to be negative, but you're going to be spending the same amount of energy. So which one yields better results for you? And if I go tit for tat with an employee that's on their way out, that's negative energy. It does me no good, does them no good. Now, had this been an employee like the first one that said, hey, what are the areas that I need to prove so I can be better in my next position? I would have been like, great, let's go through all of these different things. And that would have been super constructive and helpful for them to grow. But it's not that way always. So don't get into the weeds with people. Wrap it up, short and sweet. Thank you. Wish you the best. Even when somebody is leaving your organization, you have a choice also how you're going to handle that, how you're going to respond. And whatever choice you make as the financial advisor, as the entrepreneur, as the business owner is going to set the tone forevermore, because every single employee in your organization, even the ones that you hope and really want to make sure are going to be there the next 10 years with you, they're going to be watching this situation as the playbook for how you will handle their departure when it eventually comes. Now, how I handle gossip when people come to me and say, hey, I heard so-and-so left because of da-da-da. And these are people that don't work with me, employees, but these are people that are centers of influence or maybe in your network. And I say, hey, have you ever spent much time with Sue? And they'll say, well, no, a little or socially or blah, blah. And I say, great. Well, after you spend a little bit more time, I'm sure you won't have any more questions for me. And then that's it. I let people draw their own conclusions. I'm not going to facilitate explaining or justifying or going through all the examples of what did or didn't happen because it does not serve me. It does not serve me. It does not serve my team, and it does not serve my clients. Rather, people can draw their own conclusions on certain subjects. One of my business partners does a terrible job at this. I mean, they see every person's departure as a personal affront. And what happens is they go into like this, I don't even know how to describe it, like a beehive. Like they go into like this uber responsive, must get a hold of every single person that they've ever worked with and tell them why that person is leaving just to secure their loyalties. And it's to their detriment, to their absolute detriment, because then they end up conveying way more than they ever should have. And then also, like I just told you, every employee is looking at your actions in a leader or business entrepreneur role as a playbook for how you will handle their departure. And I know this because in that organization, I will have employees come and say, listen, I've been offered this other job, but I'm really scared to take it because the last time such and such told everyone blah, blah, blah. And I don't want that to happen to me. I don't want to have a bad reputation. So the manner in which an employee leaves becomes their choice, and a manner in which you allow them to leave, gracefully or ungracefully, is your choice as well. TPR Nation, this is Jamie Shilanski in an episode of Worlds to Conquer. Let's dive into those action items right now so that you can leave this podcast with knowing what you need to have in place. One, I gave you a master checklist. If you give somebody authorization or user access into something, make sure it comes part of that master checklist to get them out of things. Two, if you don't have good personnel files, go clean that up. Every single employee should have a folder. It should have their I-9, their W-4, their job description, their employment agreements, any type of verbal or written counselings that you've ever had, their resignation letter, as well as any sort of like internal notes on SWOTs if you do strengths, weaknesses, other areas that they need to improve on. Any type of those things should go inside of that employee file. So that's just document is just done. You never know when your employee is going to be your next lawsuit. So you always want to make sure that you tidy that up. 3, if you don't have employee agreements, come on, what are you doing? Go get an employment agreement. Go to LegalZoom, go to Rocket Lawyer, go hire an attorney, go network with an attorney and tell them what you're looking for and go get them in place. I shared with you that in my employment agreement for financial advisors and some key personnel, I like to have restrictive covenants, but those restrictive covenants have a price tag that you can get out of them anytime that you want. That's one of my suggestions. I'm not an attorney, but you can go chat with one and see if it makes sense for you. Until we visit again, go find people who share your values. Change the world.
Hold on before we go. Something that you need to know. This isn't tax, legal, or investment advice. That isn't our intent. Information designed to change lives. Financial planning can make you thrive. Start today, don't think twice. Be a better husband, father, mother, and wife. The perfect RIA